The tabletop takeaway.
Game mechanics on display.
Three designers share the stage.
Pick a genre and we'll play.
The tabletop takeaway.
Welcome back to the Tabletop Takeaway. I'm Trevor Muller-Hagel.
I'm Ananda Gunaratna.
And I'm Charlie McCarran.
And today marks our first episode going into racing games, starting with Heat, Pedal to the Metal. Heat was published here in the US in 2022, and we're really excited for this to kick off our racing games because, in my personal opinion, it really matches the racing concept really well in a very traditional fashion, right? So you are effectively like a Formula F1 car going around this racetrack that has corners, and you're having to plan and like shift gears, and it really kind of thematically ties in everything that you're doing with the actions that you take. So like your engine starts to heat up, so you have to be careful that you don't overheat your engine. As you do certain things, that will cause your engine to overheat, and that adds cards to your deck that are negatives, effectively. And so the more heat your engine builds up, you could crash and what is it? It's a spin out.
Spin out.
You could spin out, meaning that you are delayed and you have to go back to a previous checkpoint. There's a lot of different pulls. It's kind of a little bit push your luck as well as you're kind of fighting the laws of physics with cards. I really appreciate how they tied the two together. I would call it a deck builder, but it's really not a deck builder. It kind of straddles the line a little bit because the only thing you add to your deck is the heat, so are the bad cards, and you're able to manage the heat by taking certain actions or being in a certain place. I'd go over everything, but it can get a little confusing to think abstractly because it is such a visually present game. But basically, you have cards that will allow you to speed up. You have unique cards that are kind of like equipment for your vehicle that allows it to do special things. And you kind of play a number of cards based on the gear that you're in. You can only shift up or down one gear at a time. If you do more than that, you gain heat. If you hit a corner going too fast, you'll gain heat. So there's just a lot of things pushing against you to kind of manage your heat and manage which gear you're in and how many cards you're playing per turn. That's kind of just a rough overview of how the game plays. I think it's normally 2 laps around the board. And there are definitely some expansions already for it that I played the weather expansion, which was really fun and added a new kind of element to it as well. So like there's a lot of fun little twists to this game that you can add, but in its core, it's a beautiful, just pure racing game.
Yeah, and I would say that its relationship to deck builders is similar to Nemesis's relationship to deck builders in that you sort of have a fixed deck, but then there are bad things you add to it.
Right.
Also, one thing that I think we should mention is that not only do heat cards take up space in your hand, but you have a limited supply of heat cards in your engine.
Right.
And you spin out if you run out of those cards.
Right.
So it's not just that they're taking up space in your deck, it's also that you only have so many of them that you can add as a cost of doing things.
Absolutely. Yeah. And if you have to like recover from a spin out, then you start back at gear 1 to try to remove that heat as much as possible and get it back into your engine so that you're not going to spin out again.
Yeah. And Heat is, without a doubt, the best game about racing that I've played.
Yeah.
And I learned some very important lessons from it, which actually, I know we're just starting here, but
my
give
takeaway.
us the takeaways.
I just want to lead with my takeaway. So
we're off to the races already with our takeaways.
So I previously mentioned this on the Clank episode 22.
Oh man.
But the heat mechanic is something that is actually really, really cool because it's basically a sort of debt that accumulates risk as you take it. So like to take actions in Heat, the game, you accumulate, you add Heat, the resource, to your deck, and that increases your risk because now later you'll have fewer choices in your hand. But the thing that I would like to add to that is that the thing the game does that is very clever is that the main way you get rid of heat is automatically when you're in a low gear.
Right.
So if you're in the lowest 2 gears, gears 2 or 1, where you're only playing 1 or 2 cards per turn, if you have heat cards in your hand, you get rid of them. And if you don't have heat cards in your hand, then you don't get rid of them. And
Right.
that whole benefit is completely wasted. And why this is so clever is it really encourages people to take on heat. Because if you don't take on heat, then you can't get rid of heat when
You're going slow.
Yeah, when you're going slow and you have wasted a resource. And gamers hate to waste resources. So I think that this thing of debt that is automatically paid off if you have it is a really clever way to encourage people to engage with the risky and debt-driven mechanics.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I agree, and I like that there's this strategy of shifting up and down through the game, and I think I never went into first gear the entire time we played because I was playing kind of a different game of like, let's stay in third and fourth gear, but just play very low cards because I kept drawing ones in my hand, and if you can play 4 ones in a round, you only go 4 spaces around the corner, you're still safe. So I like that push your luck mechanic too, where it's like
Almost
I'll
doing
just-
card counting as well.
yeah, I'll plan to stay in high gear around this corner because I think I can get enough like low cards, which is kind of a weird
Yeah.
thing.
And if worst comes to worst, you can drop down to second, and you take a heat for
Just
it, but
take
it's
a
only
heat, yeah.
one, right? So then you can just play 2 of your cards.
Yep.
And hopefully not gain heat from that corner specifically.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, cornering is I think one of the coolest parts of the game.
Yeah.
Where it's like just having these checkpoints and probably in any racing game is important where you have to like somehow switch up your strategy or feel like, oh, there's a moment of pause where other people can catch up to you. Because I think probably any racing game where you can just keep going on a one-track thing and someone gets out ahead and, oh, we're like the crabs in a bucket that can't get out because we're just pulling at each other like Mario Kart, you know? Like,
Right,
And
right.
then meanwhile, the player in first is going off.
Already started their second lap, and you're
Yeah.
just around halfway around the first.
Yeah, so the games are amazingly tight because of that, like cornering and the catch-up. They do have a like built-in catch-up too.
Yeah. I would say it's packed with catch-up mechanics.
Yeah.
But on the topic of cornering, I think cornering also is what provides a reward for risk taking.
Yeah.
Because the corners do slow you down, right? Everyone has to drop down to a certain speed to get around the corner. But you can be a little bit risky. Like if you exceed the speed limit on a corner, the cost is you take some heat.
Right.
And sometimes, if you do that and other people don't, if you get past a corner and everyone else is stuck behind the corner, that puts you in a really good position.
Oh, yeah.
So, and in fact, that's one of the things that you try to do in this game. You try to get to the next segment of the circuit while other people are still stuck on the previous one. And to do that, you have to take on risk. So it's sort of the reward for the risk that you're taking.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah, and it's really apparent, too. Like, you can feel that choice. Like, oh, man, if I can go around this corner this turn, I'll be set. But it may mean taking 6 heat because I'm going so fast right now.
Yeah.
That's really tough. So if you can, like, go really fast right before the turn and then drop it, you're ready to go. You're good to go.
Yeah.
It's very interesting choice. For sure.
But the game is packed with catch-up mechanics because, well, there's the last place thing.
Yeah,
right?
you just get to move a space.
And recover a heat.
and recover heat,
right?
which lets you be riskier.
Encourages you to be riskier. Yep.
And then there's also the whole slipstreaming mechanic.
Slipstream is great. It
Yeah.
keeps people competitive with each other.
Yeah, if you land right behind someone or next to them, you'll get to launch ahead a couple spaces.
Literally get ahead of the person that was ahead of you before, potentially. So, like, that's, yeah.
And the extra movement doesn't count towards your speed for the turn.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it does create a little bit of mind games in it too, where you're trying to figure out, are they going to just go like the ideal amount of spaces so they get across the line? And if so, then I can time it so I'm like one behind them and then slipstream around them.
And honestly, the timing of the game, too, is really interesting with how you play your hands, because you choose what cards you're going to play all simultaneously, and then you reveal them in turn order based on where you are in the pack. And so, like, the first player is going to go first, but that means that anyone could catch up behind them and slipstream past them. So they need to figure out, okay, are they going to try and do that now, or should I try and go slow now so I can do a big turn next turn? And so it's really this push-pull. Like, okay, well, do I want to lose my lead, or do I want to just shoot off ahead and hope I don't get too much heat? It's really interesting.
Yeah, a bit of a programming mechanic there.
Yeah, yep. But very
I
light
think-
on the programming.
Yeah. I think maybe my takeaway is that I've played Heat a few times now, and to me, like, even the very simple changes in the maps make a big difference. So I kind of like that idea that you can have a super different feel in your game just by changing, like, the spacing of how far it is from the checkpoint to here, and changing the numbers on the checkpoints, which indicates, like, how fast you can go around without getting hurt. Yeah, it's just, and of course the art looks different, but that is cosmetic. But it does, yeah.
Yeah, you feel like you're in a different place.
Yeah. And it felt more like, when I looked at the different sides of the board and the different maps, I was like, oh, were these really that much different? But when you're playing it, it feels a lot different.
Yeah, 'cause
Like,
your strategy has to change and adapt.
yeah.
Yeah.
So, yeah, and just, I guess, along with that, thinking about how you can have dynamic differences along your racetrack. Like, sometimes there's huge gaps where you can just go super fast. Feels like a totally different game.
Like, oh, I'm
than when you're
moving
cornering.
16 this turn. What?
Yeah.
16?
Yeah. So I guess, like, just the general game design takeaway is, like, how can you give players a chance to play differently every turn, or, like, create this arc of, like, oh, now this turn I'm having to save up. This turn I get to use all this stuff I've been saving up to go fast or whatever.
That's a really good point, because, you know, you do have some hand management going on here too. And, you know, it's a deck. It's similar to a deck builder in that way, where, you know, you have an unknown cards coming into your hand. So trying to plan for the future is really difficult if you're playing all your cards. But if you can conserve some of those cards, like, okay, then when I hit that corner, I'm going to make sure I have this card in my hand. So you actually have some strategy, but you don't have access to everything.
Yeah.
So you don't have the full picture all the time, which I think creates that little bit of tension too, and that push your luck. One thing we haven't described is that you can, spend a heat and draw an extra card.
Yes. Which is actually the same thing as there's also stress cards.
Yes.
That
yes,
take
we
up
haven't talked about
space.
stress.
Yeah.
Yep.
So, like, there are cards in your hand. They're called stress cards. Only way to get rid of them is to play them. Or I guess there are some cards actually that can get rid of stress cards from your hand. But mostly you have to play them to get rid of them. When you play a stress card, you just flip cards from your deck until you get a boring vanilla card.
Yep,
and
a
then
movement card.
Yep, a movement card, and then you resolve. There are different. I don't know if we've mentioned there are different types of cards, but
I mentioned a little bit that there are, like, kind of equipment cards,
Sure.
but, like, I haven't gone too deep into
okay.
it.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, that's not that important. But yes, in addition to the stress card, there's also a mechanic where you can pay a heat to just flip cards, just like if you
Just like
played an
stress.
extra stress.
So, yeah, you're
Which
basically going into
actually-
overdrive.
I don't think we played with, like, I don't think anyone did that in the first two plays.
I did it
the
for
game.
ours.
The other,
the other.
times I've played, maybe
Oh,
we
sure.
forgot that rule. But
It's useful. It lets you go faster.
Yeah, gotta go fast.
But it also, it introduces uncertainty beyond just, I don't know how far other people are going.
yeah,
Because there are some situations where, okay, well, if you flip a low card, you're going to be fine. If you flip a high card, you're going to go around that corner maybe a little bit too fast.
Yeah, if you suddenly boost ahead 4 spaces, like, oh man.
yeah.
So you normally want to do that when you kind of have a feel for what's left in your deck. Maybe it's like a boost of 1 or 2, and maybe that'll let you slipstream, which will give you even further ahead. Like it's very interesting, and a lot of push and pull in that game.
Well, Trevor, back to the idea you said about the deck builder aspect and, like, building up for future turns. It's kind of funny because I think because of Dominion, most deck builders, you discard your whole hand
Right.
after every turn. But I would say, like, why do we always do that? Like, why not like a traditional card game where you play a card and keep the cards in your hand?
Right.
Obviously, like, for deck builders, I think you're trying to run through your
deck to get
more
access to
quickly
the other
get
things that you
other
purchased.
things. But
And this is probably more of a hand management game.
Yeah, I don't think I would call it a deck builder.
Yeah,
Sure.
it has a deck building component in it,
sure.
but more in a detrimental way than an investment way. So if you want to get access to your
It's like
heat,
Nemesis.
Yeah.
right?
But I mean, I guess it just makes me think maybe want to try a deck builder style where maybe you get to hold on to one card in your hand to build up to something cooler, because instead of just churning constantly.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, so another aspect actually that I think I want to mention, which is unlike the other games we're going to be talking about in this series, is that generally you go around the track twice. Mm-hmm. It's not like you go around and then it's over.
Yeah.
And I think this is a good thing because it means that the second time around, people are more familiar with the track because they've already been through it once. You know, it's not everything is new all the time. This is I remember reading something about cycles in games. I forget where, but referring specifically to Loop Hero, which takes advantage of a similar thing where your character is going around in a circle and encountering the same things over and over and over again. And in general, I think this is a very good structure for any game just because of the familiarity and the ability to adjust your strategy based on what you've learned.
Yeah, absolutely.
Like, there's a concept in game design of feedback. Like, when people go through a game for the first time, they're making choices, and they before the game ends, well before the game ends, they need to understand how their choices are affecting the outcome of the game. So that's feedback, right? You do something, you see what happens, and then having the opportunity to adjust your strategy based on that feedback the second time around or the third time around or whatever is really rewarding for players and lets them feel by the end of the first game that, you know, they've really progressed, because the second time around the track, you know, they can compare how they did to the first time around. And
Yeah, I mean, on a broader sense, like, that's why I keep wanting to play chess over and over as a whole game. Or, you know, like, I actually, usually when I lose at a game, I want to play it again more than if I won. Because, like, oh, there's room for improvement. How could I do this better?
But where you didn't feel like there were no choices too, right? You have to make it so that the choices really matter.
Yeah, and I guess the caveat is when I lose at a game, usually this happens more with like point salad games, where I don't really know why I lost compared to this person, because I think I did as best I could, and it's like, but I guess in point salad games, then the fun is, well, what's this other
Figuring out the
strategy that I
system
didn't try? But yeah,
for sure.
But that's kind of different than the loop idea. Like, how can I get better at this same thing again?
Well, and you have two loops technically too, right? You have the loop of the racetrack that you're running around, and you have the loop of your deck that's you're cycling through. And so your first couple times playing Heat, you're going to get adapting to what the deck is like, and then even though you have these set cards that are there every time, like the stress and the normal movement, you also have the ability to add in unique cards that give you special benefits in certain circumstances. So I think it really is about mastering your core loop of the deck, you know, shuffling and moving and getting heat into there and taking risk, in addition to mastering the board and how often you have to cycle. And it's really interesting managing those two different things. And it's plenty for you to think about, and it's plenty for you to strategize with. Yeah. And it's not that much, in all reality.
Yeah. And I think one other thing that is cool when you get to repeat the same thing over and over again is like those special cards, for example. Maybe you find that, oh, I can use this thing in a different way than I was able to before.
Right.
If the game has like allowed for these cards to be more than one-dimensional uses, it's like, oh, cool, I now can figure out how to use my tires more effectively.
Right. For instance, like I had a gas pedal. I had a lot of gas pedal in my deck, which allows me to increase my speed after I've played my hand, which is great because I can have a planned amount that I will be going forward. So if someone on their turn before me, they get ahead of me by 1 or 2, I've got a gas pedal of 2 great, I'm going to be able to slip now. Okay, great, now I'm going a lot faster because I held on to this little card. But
Yeah.
only gas pedals can act when it's not already in your played cards.
Yeah.
So yeah, just having those unique abilities or unique things are just a little bit different.
When I always mention it, but emergent complexity with cards and stuff is
yeah.
awesome. When it's like, oh, now I see this use for this card that combines with something else.
A different mechanic or a different
Yeah, and maybe their individual effects are pretty simple, but
Yeah. I mean, I also had a gas pedal, and in addition, I had a card that boosted my slipstream by 2.
Oh right, yeah.
So put those together, and you can get a guaranteed huge slipstream.
Epic combo.
A lot of the time.
nice.
Yeah.
Combos, and then people feel clever about their combos.
And people love to feel clever.
Yep.
So takeaways. Charlie,
I said mine. Yeah,
Okay,
it was
great.
the maps.
Oh, great,
Yeah.
great. So my takeaway is definitely going to be around focusing on the element that is important, right? So for the design, for a racing game, what are you doing? You're racing. You're trying to go faster. And so for Heat, how they do it is you're on the map, and they put some minor things on the map, but your engine is the mechanic that you're driving, and keeping that simple and fast so you feel like you're going through it quickly. And I think that all together creates this greater puzzle that's happening that you have more control over. Because you're a racer, you've been racing. You're not going to be like, you moved 0 this turn. Like what? No, you wouldn't ever do that in a professional Formula One racing game. So like being able to create a smaller experience that they can master and really truly understand what's going on, and then have a slightly dynamic board, but that's predictable and isn't variable. Like you're not going to be flipping things over. Like there are the weather expansion does make things a little bit more interesting and a little bit more depth on the map, but it's not so crazy that you're not able to plan for it. So like being able to just be able to plan for what's going on is great. But yeah. So having that core of what is driving the engine, literally, of the racing game, and having that be simple and fast is my favorite part of Heat. So I think I want to take that away from it.
And totally your own area.
Yes.
Like no one's messing with your engine. I like that.
Yeah, I really like the focus on your car.
Yeah.
Like there's the board, of course, and you care about the board, but you also
And position, yeah.
But you also really feel like you care about what's going on in your car.
Yeah.
Like you care about, okay, here's, I'm
The
shifting
gears.
the gear.
Yeah.
There's the heat in the engine that I have to make sure it doesn't run out of, which I guess corresponds to overheating.
Right.
There's just like, you're very focused on what's happening inside the car. As opposed to, I guess, what you would sort of naively assume a race game would be about, which is sort of just focus on the board, and the car is very abstracted.
Really, Heat could be a roll and move, and you could just be rolling like 3d6s to move your spaces. And you'd all be moving roughly the same average, and whoever wins. But that is not exciting. And so, like, that would be just the map on its own, right? But if you have this core engine that you can manipulate and really play with and tinker with, and manipulate it so you can have just a little bit better edges while you're going around this very simple map.
Yeah. And to segue into our next games, I think it's interesting that we sort of picked 3 games that have their own little area for your things, but there's going to be more chaos coming soon.
This is a very organized first game.
Yeah.
And very representative of racing, which is great.
Yeah.
So, did we cover everything we wanted to on Heat?
I think so.
I'm feeling good.
Okay, let's move on to our next game in the next episode, which is Robo Rally.
Transformers Edition. Hey, thanks for listening to The Tabletop Takeaway. This podcast is made possible by listeners like you. So please tell your friends and visit our website at thetabletoptakeaway.com, where you can suggest games and mechanics for us to cover next on the show.